All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's episode of Teen Talk Live. I am your host, Ann Dillard. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am so excited to come to you on this weekly platform, sharing knowledge and tips and strategies to empower and transform lives and minds, right? Okay, good evening, so I'm just checking out my sound here and making sure that I can see you and I can hear you. And tonight we have a treat for you. Hey, Catrice. Hey, Dr. Adrian, thank you for joining. Hey, Daryl, thanks for joining. We have a treat for you tonight because we have none other than my friend, my colleague, Chasity Chandler, who is the sex therapist, and she's gonna help us have this conversation, critical conversation. So think about your questions, start dropping them in the comment section because we want to hear from Chasity tonight. Catrice says, hey ladies. Hey Catrice, thanks for joining.
Hey girl, hey.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. Tell the viewers who you are and what it is that you do.
Oh, awesome. So as Ann said, my name is Chasity Chandler. I am a private practice clinician down in Florida. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor as well as a certified sex therapist and a few other credentials. But what I basically do is I help people to get help without the guilt and shame that kind of surrounds it. And I pride myself on holding a space that is very encouraging and empowering. And so that's what we do here at the Center for Sexual Health and Wellness.
Thank you. And we're going to jump right in because you said something that's really, really key. A lot of times when we think about sex and we think about talking about sex, it's always that not every time, but a lot of times, especially as a teenager, it's always that taboo kind of shame that goes along with it. And so can you help us understand a little bit about where does that come from? And most of my viewers are parents, so we want to help them navigate those delicate conversations and those sensitive feelings that go along with it. So where does some of that come from, Chad?
I think the taboo kind of comes from generation through generation through generation, right? So if I'm a parent and I feel like sex or topics associated with sex are taboo or shame filled or bad and sinful, then that kind of carries along to my offspring, right? The kids kind of sense it. You feel a certain way when a certain scene comes on the TV, or you have a certain point of view about a certain thing. And if they see that you're not a person that they can actually explore this conversation with, then 9 times out of 10, as I put in an article I contributed to, I think 2 years ago now, was they're either learning it from the internet, from their friends, or possibly their friends' moms or their friends' parents. If their friends' parents are more quote unquote cool or easier to talk to, they may be reaching out to somebody else to have these conversations. And so I think one of the first things we need to do is kind of embrace the fact that we are sexual beings. This whole notion that we're going to treat everything holistic, right? And we're just going to leave sexual completely out of it.
Right.
I think it's a disservice to both ourselves, if we are a clinician, a therapist, or a helper to the people we serve, and definitely a disservice to our kids.
Well, even as a parent, I mean, we want to make sure that our kids get a balanced spiritual diet. We want to make sure that they have physical activities, and we want to make sure that they're doing well academically. But I can't even say for myself as a parent, their sexual well-being was something that was a priority.
And it absolutely has to be in today's time. It has to be. I remember when I was writing that article, I think at the time my daughter might have been 14. And I asked her a question, 14 in middle school. I asked her a question. I said, hey, what do you know about sex? She blushed and she was like, I'm not talking to you about this. I was like, cool. She was like, but you can call my bestie. So I call her bestie. I FaceTime her. And they're like 13 and 14 and in middle school, and kids are having sex behind the bleachers in the gym. They're performing all types of sexual acts, and basically we're able to describe in vast detail the various sexual acts that some of their classmates were engaging in. And so to sit and think that our kids don't know, especially when we're in the age of smartphones, is probably not a smart assumption. You know, I teach human sexuality every now and then. It's my favorite class to teach. And masturbation takes place in the womb. So to think that we are born into this world, and even before we even breathe the oxygen on this earth, there can be sexual moments. So to think that our 14, 15, 16, heck, 8-year-old, 7-year-old sons and daughters are not engaging in or curious about sex, I think is a vast misconception.
I think you are right because again there has been so much shame and so much taboo around the topic of sex because it's seen in a lot of venues is talked about as something so dirty, something so sinful, something so wrong. And so if you're not able to talk to your parents about it, then there's all these other avenues open and willing to share with you about it, right? Like you said, the internet, that's like, I it's so amazing to me, and not amazing in a good way, but so amazing to me, the level of access that our teenagers or even preteens have to the internet. And they're not putting the boundaries on that we would put as parents. And so our kids have all this information, and then they're just running it by their besties who have in most cases the same level of information that they have.
Absolutely, man. And then I always say, maybe I'm a parent that is not comfortable talking about sex, or maybe my first sexual experiences were not pleasant or healthy. There are people out there that can help you to explore these conversations with your kids. There are products that are out there that can help prepare you to explore these conversations with your kids. But to just ignore it, I think is half, if not all, of the problem we have as it relates to the lack of knowledge and this fear that we instill into our kids as it relates about sex. We want to talk about how you shouldn't do it, how it will relate, how it will in turn cause pregnancy or etc., and how you should be abstinent. But we don't have the conversations about pleasure. We don't have the conversations about how do you know when you're going to be ready, and we don't create an environment where our kids can actually come to us a lot of times with when they are ready, and how do we help them to protect themselves, and how do we navigate that when my kid is ready and they want to do it, even if that goes against my belief system or what I felt I had for them. How do I go about navigating that arena?
Yeah, that's you know especially when we're talking about teens, those are topics and areas that's usually not associated with sex in that conversation, like sex being pleasurable or sex being something that's wonderful and fun and things like that. It's usually, again, don't do it. If you do it, you'll get pregnant or you get an STD. And so sex is so much more than just intercourse, and so much more than pregnancy, and so much more than STDs. But if we're not helping to pass on this healthy concept or a healthy narrative around it, it creates so much problems.
Absolutely. I remember one time I was on the phone with Bay and we were talking, and I was like, "Oh, you sound sexy." I was like, "So are you sleepy? Or are you sexy? Because last night you were trying to be sexy and you were sleepy." And my son was in the car. He was like, "Ooh, mama, you said a bad word." And I said, "What word did I say bad?" He said, "The S word." I said, "You mean sex?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "Sex is not a bad word." I said, "It's just something that kids shouldn't do." And that was my explanation to him. So how we respond to comments, to situations as it relates to sex with our kids can either make or break their confidence and their demeanor as it relates to them as a sexual being. You know, like I mentioned masturbation earlier. Masturbation is a natural part of our psychosexual development, right? So if you catch your child, I mean, what happens? We touch ourselves, it feels good, right? We know this, right? So you don't think a kid knows this? And when they do it, how do you respond as a parent? You know,
Right.
for my kids, I told my kids, you know, that's something you do in private. That's not something you do in front of other people. But I didn't dare tell my son or my daughters, like, that's not something you do. Because again, it could really stunt their development sexually. And you know how many women are grown adults that I meet who they don't even know how to please themselves, let alone help their partners to navigate their bodies. And part of that came from what was instilled in them as kids, as how bad sex was and how touching yourself was bad and how it was going to cause you to go blind and all of these other myths associated with, you know, masturbation, etc. And so again, really looking at what was the narrative that was mentioned or told to us, what was the conversation. Some of us didn't get the conversation, or we didn't get the conversation until it was too late.
Exactly.
Right. And when I say too late, I mean like pregnant. You didn't discuss this with me, and now I got to come to you and tell you that I'm pregnant, and now it's a big thing.
And it's something, because masturbation is a big topic, and there's so much taboo around it, and I think that it's something that it's a conversation that every family has to have. It's an important conversation to navigate, because I don't know, a lot of times, you know, when we talk to especially teenagers and developing teen boys who are going through those phases, and they don't understand what's happening in their bodies, and their bodies are changing, and this feels good, but then they can form some additional habits that go along with that causes more dysfunction later in their sexual life. And so I think being able to have that conversation is so key. It's so key. Like, I work with childcare providers, and sometimes they get really, really afraid and scared when they notice a toddler is rocking themselves and soothing themselves to go to sleep, and they're like, oh my God, what should we do? What should we do? And it's like, and it's as young as that we start sending that message that doing something so natural is so bad. And so I had to help some of my clients to, okay, take the lens off of, okay, this is bad, or this is sexual, if you deem sexual as bad, and say, he's providing, that's a soothing mechanism to go to bed or to go to sleep. And so understanding that at such a young age, and us as adults having that knowledge to be able to navigate those conversations, those spaces, is so critical.
And from a personal and professional standpoint, I think we're sexualizing way too many things. And I think that says a lot about the adults who are navigating these conversations. Not everything is sexual. Not everything is about sex, and not everything is a good or bad type situation. And I think there's way too much of that in today's time of sexualizing everything.
That is so true. And I'm going to come back to that, because I want to pick up that comment. But let me take time to welcome our guests. Hey, Lakeisha. Hey, Ivy. Thank you for being here. And Cecile said, hey, ladies. Hey, Cecile. Thank you for joining us. Felicia, I'm glad you're here with us. And Lakeisha is inviting her friends to join this conversation. Sabra says, hey, ladies. Thank you for joining us, Sabra. And Lamar, thanks for being here. Catrice says, yes, I have a 17 and a 25-year-old, and sex is definitely a topic of conversation. I have clients as early as 7th grade having sex. That is so, so true. Absolutely. And not necessarily, they're doing an act, but not necessarily understanding what it is that they're doing without the conversation and without guidance. And Kelly is here. Thank you. Lamar say it's scary. Saber said, hey, ladies, Dr. Paula is here. Thanks for joining us. Catrice says, social media is a big influence. Yes, Catrice, it really is. Saber said, Chasity Chandler, the expert, is in the house. And Cecile says, I think the how on different levels is critical. And
I was going to expound upon that, the how on different. Oh, she mean like on how to talk to our kids?
I believe so.
Okay.
Expound on that, Cecile. What do you mean the how? The how is as in the mechanism of sexual act, or how to talk to your kids about it? Let's know which how you're talking about. Natalie say, hey guys, hey Nat. Rashida is here and watching on Instagram. No, Rashida Ingram is here and watching. Cecile says, how to discuss, we need to discuss on many levels before they are ready. Okay, so
absolutely,
that's coming up. We're going to talk about how to engage in these conversations. Adrielle is here and Renelle is here. Lots of people are here joining this conversation. Raylene, thanks for being here. Felicia Martin, Dr. Alvin, thanks for being here. Reshma, thank you for being here. Sis Kimball, thanks for being here. Shate, thank you for joining your business bestie tonight. And Sharon Lawrence, thanks for being here. Oh my goodness. So we have a full house of people who are contributing to this conversation. So let's go. We're going to talk about the how, but let's go back to the point, Chastity, about we over sexualize everything, or too much.
Well, there's a lot of body shaming and victim blaming. Oh, well, if they didn't dress this way, this wouldn't happen. I remember there was a thing about the dance group. I think it was down here in South Florida, and what they were wearing. And everybody was like, they don't need to be wearing that. They're going to attract grown men. If a grown man is attracted to a young girl, that attraction didn't come about because the young girl had on something, some sort of clothing per se. Those types of attractions don't necessarily occur just because of a piece of clothing that you have on, nor is that an excuse or an explanation as to why these girls can't wear what they're supposed to wear to dance. I mean, there's always been a certain level of a certain expectation of the clothing for dance teams and for cheerleaders and etc. And that's not going to attract a grown man to think about this child in a sexual way.
Well, let me interject and kind of play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
So in parts of society, we're brought up to think that, or to understand that, men are visual. So whatever you put in front of them, you then are blamed as the woman for putting that visual there, because men are stimulated visually. So and then that in a lot of cases relinquish them of the responsibility of acting as a grown person.
Gotcha. I think that's way too much of that going on too. I follow a couple of different pages and things on Facebook, and I swear us women, we get blamed for everything. Men don't have to take responsibility for many actions nowadays. I thought we were going to be taking accountability in 2019, but let me just say this. There are many different types of people in this world. There are many different types of sexual attraction. There's many different love and relationship types. Me, myself, personally, I see and treat all. And so I have ran the gamut of those different sexual attractions, relationship types, gender identities, sexual and relationship love types. I see it all. We could pretty much put blame on anybody about anything if we're going to really get nitpicky and etc. If I want to wear booty shorts and walk down the road in booty shorts, that does not give anybody the right to violate me sexually. It doesn't give anybody the right to touch me or treat me differently because I want to wear booty shorts down the road. At the end of the day, there are certain athletic events and there are certain extracurricular activities that come along with a certain type of uniform. I mean, we don't look at it the same if we have a gymnast doing gymnastics on the floor and they have the tight leotard on. We don't look at that any different. But if you got this girl with maybe a shorter skirt, some leggings or tights on, or maybe they got on heels because they walk in a line, now that's sexualized and they're going to sexually attract someone. And so I think there's just kind of like it's a double standard. And I think it has a lot to do with culture as well. Certain cultures, certain body types, you know, I'm shapely. There's certain things, there's nothing I'm going to put on that's going to completely hide what I was blessed with. You understand what I'm saying? And
Right.
kids nowadays, a lot of times, are way more developed than we are as adults who've had kids. And I mean, I get it. There are ways in which we might suggest our kids to dress in certain types of clothing. And I get all of that. But this whole idea that if you wear this, you're a slut, or if you wear this, you're asking for this. I think it just takes away from the ability of people to just express themselves. How we show up in bodies and encompasses who we are as a sexual being. I love to wear my heels. Those who know me know I love my heels. Does wearing my heels make me a slut? The higher the heel, the more slutty I am? Or is it
Mm-hmm.
just an expression of me and my femininity that I love to wear heels?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to be a sexual notion to it?
Mm-hmm.
Or can I just love to wear heels? Is what I'm saying. Everything is so
Right. And I think what you're saying, is very valid because it again puts the onus on the woman to take care of herself, protect herself, and also guard herself from potential predators.
let's talk about that. I'm glad you brought up potential predators because I know we're talking about kids and teens and when to start talking to them about sex. And you know, I always hear, this why I don't let my kids be around strangers. This why this don't happen. Statistically speaking, the people who harm our kids are not the strangers. That's not who we
Better
need
say
to
that.
necessarily be looking out for. It's the people that we trust our kids with. Sometimes it's us, meaning the parents. It's close friends. It's the pastor. It's the counselor. It's the coach. It's the it's the people who have built these intimate and trusting relationships with our kids, who potentially are the ones more times than not who actually sexually violate our children. So it's not the strangers so much we got to be worried about. It's the people that you got your guard down on. It's the people who you quote unquote would have never suspected. It could be the other parent. It could be, uh, yeah, a sibling. It could be that cousin. I deal a lot with people who are survivors of sexual abuse, and that stuff doesn't go away. Um,
Right.
myself, I'm a survivor, and what I can say is that there was a lot of stuff that wasn't told to my 7-year-old self. And there was a lot that I didn't disclose until I was a grown up. A lot of times the child doesn't know that what's being done to them is wrong.
That's
And
right.
again, our body responds to what feels good. So even if it is inappropriate or if it is illegal or if it wasn't consensual, does not mean that our body is not going to respond. Lots of rape victims have this inner conflict. I was raped, but I had an orgasm. So did that mean that I liked it? Did that mean that it was warranted? No, our body is our body, and physiologically, it's going to respond, regardless if it was warranted, wanted or not. And so, with that being said, we have to know that there are people who are grooming our kids. There are people who don't just see your kid as this innocent person. They may be visualizing them in a sexual way. It may actually be what is going on. And typically they will groom our kids. And so they get close to them, they earn their trust, they start giving them extra privileges and extra activities, money, toys, anything that will, and then they make it their little secret. You know,
Exactly.
and so I think that brings us to one of the hows. I used to be one of those parents that had all those little cute little nicknames for the body parts. Even though I am a survivor, even though I work in this field, I remember going to a sexual assault or sexual abuse training, and the lady told a story about the young girl was going to her therapist and kept telling her therapist that her dad was going in her kitchen. Right? The therapist didn't catch on. So what we must know is a lot of times the predators or those who are sexually attracted to kids will groom them by also nicknaming their body parts. So when Cecile asked about the how, the first how is for us to teach and empower our kids on what their body parts are actually called. So penis,
Exactly.
vaginal, testicles, testes, buttocks. We got to empower them to be able to know that. And we also need to let them know that nobody, including ourselves at a certain point, should be
Exactly.
touching them in those spaces. So at some point, your kid has to learn how to bathe themselves. At some point, we have to make sure that they know that these are parts of my body that nobody should be touching unless I want them to and unless I have okayed it. Right.
Exactly.
And so I think that's the first line of defense. And some might say, well, when does that need to start happening? In my opinion, as a professional and as a mother, is that it needs to start happening as soon as your child can start talking. So when the first words start coming in, we need to be teaching them these words as well and what they go along with and how they can communicate to us if somebody is doing something that is inappropriate or harmful.
That is so true. And I remember I started talking with my kids every time I would put them in the tub. We were talking about body parts. We were talking about, this is your private part, and putting, giving them that information, which wasn't scary. And I think if the more you give that information and start giving it age appropriate doses, it doesn't become as scary. And then when things out of the norm happens, then the kids are more inclined to come to you about it because you didn't put that initial shame there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just like if you walked in on your child masturbating, what would be your response?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think, but that initial response can set the tone for the rest of your child's psychosexual development and what they feel is quote unquote good or bad, which inflicts shame and guilt. And so we have to be mindful of how we respond, how comfortable you are versus when you talk to your kid. Maybe you're not comfortable. Maybe you need to go talk to somebody. Maybe you need to take a webinar. Maybe you need to take a course on how to a workshop on how to talk to your kid about sex. So you kind of get some feedback and some guidance on how to navigate that conversation. But I just want to definitely put a cautionary some caution in not having the conversation because you're not comfortable.
And I think that's really good. Yesterday I was out in public and this one woman who I know, she approached me and we were talking, and her teen daughter happened to walk up and she said, I want you to meet Miss Ann, and I want you to meet her because she's having the show about sex, and I want you to listen to it. And she went on to say, sometimes she was talking to her daughter. She said, sometimes mama don't know the right things to say. And sometimes I just can't do it. And so I want you to have an avenue where you can get the right information. And I thought that was just such a beautiful, beautiful interaction happening
Awesome.
right in front of my face, because sometimes we don't have the skills. Sometimes we have our own shame and legacy burdens that we're dealing with, and it's hard to help somebody navigate that, right, because of the different levels of triggers that causes us, right? So I think that's another one of the hows is find somebody capable to have that conversation
Absolutely.
if you're not able to. Now I see that we have a question, and Deshelle says, at what age would you talk to kids about sex?
Like I said, age appropriate dosage. I say from the time they start actually speaking. But as far as you mean like the sexual act or acts of sex or sexual intercourse, I mean, again, age appropriate. I wouldn't wait until uh they got their period or they had their first wet dream. I would definitely begin at this nowadays. Hmm. Again, I still say age appropriate, and that's really up to the parents, but I would definitely say somewhere between 7 and 9. I
Yeah,
wouldn't put the conversation off too far past that because you got to understand nowadays too, a lot of kids are actually uh having their menses at a very early age. And so if I start
exactly.
my menses at 8 and you didn't have this conversation with me, I could be a mother by 9. I mean, that's
Yes,
the reality of the world that we live in. And so I think age appropriate, small dosages, and then with what's out there outside of social media, regular TV, there's very few shows that I see that doesn't have some sort of interaction um sexually. I mean, heck, they're kissing on Disney Channel now. So we really have to have these conversations sooner than later, and maybe even just setting the tone. Hey, what do you know about sex? Our kids will more than likely probably be very timid and shy. They're not going to want to have the conversation. But if you were the one who brings up the conversation and maybe engage and see where they are on their knowledge or what they know, you never know what door that might open. Because maybe at 9, I'm not ready to have that conversation with you, but maybe at 12, because you brought it up at 9, now I know you might be a safe person and someone I can feel comfortable navigating that conversation. So to each his own on when you have the conversation. I can't really tell you when or where to have it, but what I can tell you is the earlier the better. And
Right.
again, age appropriate dosages. So 9 times out of 10, by the time a child is 7 to 9, they've discovered their bodies. And so if you're
Absolutely.
paying attention and or have had that conversation with them, I think it kind of comes in layers. But
Exactly.
but for us to feel like the kid is too young, but yet they got a smartphone. If they got a smartphone, they have access to all of this and much, much more. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
whew,
I think that's important, and I also think that it's important that we extend our narrative of sex beyond intercourse and
absolutely.
talk about, it's more than pregnancy, it's more than STDs. It's talking to our kids about sexting. That's a big thing amongst teens,
Absolutely.
right? And I see it all the time, and I don't think teens know the ramifications of sexting.
No, a lot of times they don't. And then legal age for consent is big. I live in Florida. We're one of those states that's very strict on that. And I know kids who have been labeled as sex offenders for simply doing what used to be done back in the day, like mooning, or something as simple as urinating in public. If a child is anywhere in the vicinity and sees that, you could easily be labeled as a sex offender. In Florida, the age of consent is 16. So if my child is 16 and they engage in a sexual act with a 15-year-old, that is a crime. That is statutory rape in our state, right? Doesn't matter if my child consents to it. Doesn't really matter if I was even okay with it. The state attorney can pick it up, and that child's life will, I don't want to say the life will be over, but it will be drastically impacted.
Drastically impacted,
Drastically
because
impacted.
that is a federal offense. And a lot of times parents don't really know the legal issues around sexting. So there was a huge case, I think it was in Houston, where a 16-year-old girl was sharing body parts
Mm-hmm.
with her boyfriend, but
Mm-hmm.
she was charged and she had to register as a sex offender because
Distribution of child porn.
it's
Mm-hmm.
illegal for
Mm-hmm.
children to send parts or receive pictures of your private parts on text, on emails, and stuff like that. And the other part about it is for people who open that and continue to send that and continue to view that, that's also illegal.
Yep. Distribution of child porn. You could be labeled a
Distribution of child porn. And I don't think a lot of people understand the legal ramifications, yes, Lakeisha, associated with sexting.
lots.
And so I think it's an important conversation that we need to have with our teenagers, or even before they become teenagers. As long as they have access to a smartphone, they need to know how to use it.
Yeah. Smartphones, video games. There are lots of video games that have these chats. And I don't know if you guys know, but like sex offenders and sexual predators, I'm gonna say sexual predators, a lot of times will go on these games and pose as, same
Players,
age as our kids and
yes,
players. And a lot of times they get our kids to meet up with them. They do all this stuff. See, like I said, I'm in Florida and they do lots of things on this type of stuff. And they catch a lot of sex offenders and sexual predators this way in Florida, because the undercovers go on these games and pose as well. But there are lots of that going on. And so no game, no apps. I mean, there's apps that they can hide the fact that they're having these conversations. You know what I
exactly.
mean?
It's like back rooms to a lot of these apps and a lot of these games. You open up different levels that gives you different privileges behind the scene. And they're popping up daily. So as soon as one get caught and they're taken down, there's more popping up.
Absolutely. So the next time I do my workshop, I'm actually going to get someone from the sheriff's office to come and talk about cyber safety with the parents, because I think we underestimate a lot of what our kids are actually capable of doing. And then
And
a
that,
lot of kids have lost their lives because of this. I know there was a girl here in Florida who was sending her pictures to her boyfriend or someone on Snapchat, and then when those pictures got out, she committed suicide. And so it's bigger than um, just the shame and all of that. Must have been something that she felt like she could not face. And so we have to be proactive in this thing, and teaching our kids that this is illegal, and teaching our kids about sex, and although we may want them to be abstinent, safe sex. I came from a family where everybody got pregnant at the age of by 17. And I told my sister, I said, I was third generation. I told my sister, I said, no, you're going to beat this thing, right? You're going to beat this thing. And she beat the thing. She got pregnant at 16, right? So I was just sitting here thinking, as we're talking, my daughter will be 17 in October. Wow. And if she makes it to 18 without being pregnant, she'll be the first person in my family in 4 generations. She'll be the first person in 4 generations of females that did not get pregnant before they became 18. First.
Talk about changing a legacy. I mean, that's the power of knowledge, right? Having that knowledge, having that conversation, facing it, as uncomfortable, as much discomfort as it causes, as much whatever feelings that you might have about it, but to be able to face that changes legacy. We're talking about generational changes.
Absolutely. And then, me and my sister were able to accomplish some great things, and we didn't allow that to stop us. But life would have been different without having a kid by the time I was 18, her without having a kid by the time she was 17, and taking on that responsibility as a parent. And so we got to let our kids be kids as long as they can, but also realize that they're growing up. And there are certain things that they're going to be curious about. There are certain things that they're going to engage in. I'd much rather equip them to engage and experiment in these things than to send them out into this world without that knowledge, for sure.
And I'm self-disclosure, in my household, abstinence is what we taught. We also understood that there are other options as well. But the thing about it is that was our family values, and it was wonderful when our kids, on their wedding day, they gave us their purity ring and all of that. We had a ceremony and stuff. So that was what we taught. But we also understand that there's so many other things going on. And intercourse is just a snippet of that conversation as it relates to sex. There's that whole conversation about intimacy, the whole, like you said, about pleasure, about consent. What about consent? What are we teaching our kids about their ability to give or refuse have sexual acts?
Absolutely. And I literally just contributed to an article that's probably been shared about 50 times since the whole R. Kelly thing. But I contributed to this article in December, prior to all of this happening. And we definitely have to empower our kids to have a voice. Consent is everything. And I know this was a conversation that was online, and people were talking about how they were taught and raised to not sit on men's laps and all of these other things. Well, some of us weren't taught that. Some of us weren't exposed to situations where we could sit on a father's lap or a grandfather's lap, or to know about how that could possibly stimulate a man. And so, when your kids don't want to get a kiss from their grandma, or they don't want to get a kiss from you, like, we can't keep forcing those things, because then we tell our kids that they don't have the right to tell someone to not kiss them or to not touch them. Come over here and give grandma a hug or grandpa a hug. If they don't want to give grandma or grandpa a hug, we have to be okay with that. So I think consent should start right there with those quote unquote innocent interactions with a person, and not forcing our kids to kiss and hug and those types of things, even with relatives. It should not be something that should be forced. They have the right to not want to kiss and not want to give you a hug.
That is so true. And I just found an article that I was interviewed for around the whole R. Kelly thing. And that's exactly what I shared in there, Chastity, about how, we have to stop stifling the voices of our children. And I was talking specifically about our girls. We have to stop stifling their voices. We have to stop shutting down their intuition. Because when we force them to do stuff like that you just described, we're saying what you're feeling and your voice is not valuable here.
And so when they get in that dating relationship, and then their partner or potential partner is pushing up on them and saying, "Oh, well, it's not going to be a big deal. I'll make it this way. It won't hurt, or it's just sex." We've already set the tone that if you don't feel like you want to do it, or if you don't want to engage, it's okay to give into that, because you had to give into that.
Right. It's your job to please somebody else.
Exactly. Or not disappoint.
And that's a really important message, that we have to change the narrative around that. Let me see what some of our viewers are saying. They are hanging in here with us. Catrice said, "Ooh, we Chastity. Yes, mine will be 18 in June. I'm talking, hoping, and praying. I do understand that she's a part of me, and we have to be realistic." Catrice, I'm with you. I'm pulling with you, changing that legacy. I totally agree about not forcing kids. We take their power away. And Terry says that, and it is so, so, so true. And Saber says, yes, children need to know consent from day one. I do that for my granddaughter. And that is so true. I want her to know consent now. And I think in some communities, the idea of consent at such a young age is so new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to have those conversations so that our kids can be empowered to have boundaries and to recognize and set boundaries. Because a lot of times growing up, we have disempowered our kids by saying, what you feel is invaluable. I'm going to tell you what to feel. I'm going to give you, all those kinds of things. We don't ask your opinion. I'll tell you what to think. All that kind of talk. And it transcends into the different areas of their life, including sexual areas and sexuality.
Absolutely.
And I think we have a responsibility to change that. And Catrice says, yes, love that. I'm not taking my girls' love on making my girls love on anyone they're not feeling. And that's so true. And one more, Terry says, I have one that will be 18 in June. And it's sad that some parents have to pray to get them to 18 without pregnancy. I agree, but that's the reality.
Yeah, and I think, and again, my grandma, I don't mean put your business out there, grandma, but I'm gonna be completely transparent. My grandma got pregnant the first time she had sex. So again, back in the day, there was a lack of knowledge. There was not all of what we know today. And so I love the abstinence conversation. I love the purity ring ceremony. I think that those are a beautiful thing. But for certain families and certain backgrounds, that's not the case. My daughter she don't even date. So I feel blessed. I'm not necessarily concerned about it. She's a really good kid. She's really focused on what her goals and ambitions are. But at the end of the day, we can have this conversation. Who she likes, who she's interested in, who she might have a crush on, that's completely open. I also raise my kids to not be so subscribed to gender roles and expectations and gender expression, like, oh, you're a girl, you got to do X, Y, and Z. That wasn't me growing up, and I'm not going to push that on them. Your viewers may or may not agree, but you can't catch being gay. So this whole thing, if my daughter doesn't like fluffy dresses and pink and purple, it's not gonna make her gay. If she is who she is, I either embrace who she is completely, or I'm telling her that certain parts of you is not okay.
Exactly.
Something's wrong with who you are. If you're not a girl and you don't wear fluffy pink dresses and purple in your favorite color, something's wrong with that. So again, I think goes back to the narrative of what you're saying and what it is, what sex and sexuality as a whole means. Because I think some of us, even as parents, we don't understand the concept. And if we got to do better.
We do, and we have to change the language. We have to change the narrative. You know what? I work primarily with teen girls and their moms, and a lot of my teen girls, I kid you not, they are struggling because I have a lot of high achievers, and they're like, I'm focusing on school, but when I'm at home, I'm hearing questions of, "Are you gay? Why you not dating? You need a boyfriend." And so it's like, what is happening when parents are forcing their children into sexual expressions and they're trying to focus on it? And my kids are like, I don't have time for that. I'm focusing on my education. Because, you know, I was told too that I need to get a scholarship to go to college. So I'm choosing to focus on this. So I think as parents, we have to really look at what the implications of what we're saying and what we're doing to our children.
And to me, that's sending mixed messages and sending mixed signals. You're saying you want them to stay pure and not engage in sex, but yet you're saying, why are you not dating, or why don't you have a boyfriend, or why don't you have a girlfriend? You know, and they feel that pressure. Heck, we talk about it as adults who maybe have never been married and never have kids, how it is to go around your family for the holidays, and they talk about when you're going to have a baby, when you're going to get married. So why instill that type of pressure and expectations on our kids? Let them be kids. Let them express. Let them navigate who they are. Let them discover who they are. Let them embrace that. They got their whole lives to be in relationships. They got their whole lives ahead of them for that. And I think that's really important.
I think a lot of times it's some kind of discomfort within the parents themselves. And so it's really hard for them to even engage in these conversations. And so they want to see their child do this and do that to really pacify their discomfort.
Yep. You wouldn't believe, I get clients all the time, and I'll get a call, and I got a call from a father, and he says, my kid found you on the internet and they want to come see you for therapy. Okay, cool. Do you have any idea why? Nope. They found you, blah, 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 blah. Cool. So I guess the dude gets off the phone and he Googles me. And so he immediately calls back. He immediately calls back. And he's like, I'm not sure. I said, sir, trust me. If your daughter found me and she says I'm the person she needs to see, trust me, I'm the person she needs to see. And just so happened, it was exactly what, I don't get a whole lot of calls about kids in our teens. A lot of my calls from kids in our teens, if it's not like EAP or insurance and dealing with parent issues, it's mostly dealing with their sex or sexuality or gender expression or gender identity. Typically, that's why a kid would find me and why they would want to talk to me. Right. And so, I navigated that. I had a great first session with the client, and I never seen him again. And that happens, and I have to be okay with that. But trust me, if your child is out here looking and asking to see somebody, no matter what their specialty area is, the area of expertise, if they found us, they really need to see us, and we really need to make sure that we are holding the space to properly navigate these things. I don't know how many of my colleagues even feel uncomfortable addressing sex. I see a lot of couples, and I see a lot of people who their therapists won't even go there with them. And so we have to ask ourselves as professionals if this is a barrier. This is one of those times, as my colleague, Dr. Butler, would say, we got to do the work to do the work. Now, if you can't navigate this arena, it's not that this arena needs to be off limits for your teen clients, your kid clients, or your adult clients. It means you still have some work as a professional to do, maybe in a professional development realm of how can I be more comfortable in speaking about this topic or these conversations with my clients. Because trust me, your clients want to and possibly have a need to navigate these arenas. Right. And if they feel like you are not a safe place for them to do this, we are pretty much doing a disservice to our clients. Right. So we definitely need to expand our referral sources as far as it goes with sex therapists, sex educators, and sex counselors, because 9 times out of 10, we are more comfortable and a lot of times more equipped to have these conversations with clients. So,
and that is so key. That is so key. And I've grown into more becoming more comfortable having these conversations, especially being a mom and not having had that conversation, but learning a little more and more how to have the conversation with my children. And then in my practice, I can't have therapy with teens without having that conversation. And that is one of my intake questions. And, they look at me like, and I said, that's important because that, are you sexually active? Are you thinking about becoming sexually active? Because that, there's some more information I need to share with you.
Absolutely.
And we need to have a different level of conversation. And I have that with my 6th grade clients, my 7th grade, 8th grade, because it's real. It's real. And I want to know how much they know so that, I'm not dumping stuff on them, but helping to guide.
Absolutely. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but sex education in the United States sucks very badly. It doesn't equip our kids with what they need to know. It doesn't, in other countries that it's way more advanced, and they got what, there's a show right now on TV. It's pretty good. I actually am a fan. Called Sex Education. I heard some therapists talking about it, and some of them were taken back by the content. But it actually is about teens and some of the things that they're exploring and navigating as it relates to sex. And it's pretty realistic, in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
And it's in a different country. It takes place in a different country. And other countries, like I said, are much more, they teach pleasure in their sex education classes. They don't hide from these things like we do. What do we teach them in sex ed? You have sex, you get pregnant, or you're going to catch an STI.
You're right.
Like that, that's all there is to being a sexual being. And so, I mean, everywhere we turn.
And the other thing about it is to know that the resources are out there. So, hey, Daphne, thank you for joining. Hey, Kelvin say, hey, ladies, rock it. And Candace Barnes, thank you for joining. Saber say it's excellent. So I want to check out that show because chances are my kids are watching it and I need to know about it.
Yeah, I was watching it on my daughter's account and she texted me, hey, Mom, are you watching Sex Education on my Netflix? I was like, yeah, baby, I'm going to tell your daddy that it's me that's watching it. My ex-husband was ready to probably break her neck when he thought she was watching it. So, yeah, it is on Netflix.
That is so true. So we are coming to the end, but let me read what Cassandra says. She says, children are protected and given more rights in regards to HIPAA privacy. So as a nurse, I see young women coming to us for birth control and testing for sexually transmitted diseases and information and not be disclosed. And information cannot be disclosed to protect the privacy of the children.
Absolutely.
On many levels, I understand this. So if we don't change the narrative around sexual wellness and open conversations with our children, our children will continue to be fully informed. If we change the narrative, they can be fully informed and not just wait for a health professional to tell your child, because I do believe that family values play a big role in it also. If you have a family who have core values that they operate by. Absolutely. I think that's really important also. And Deshaun says, don't get that baby in trouble.
As soon as she texted me, I already knew what it was. I was like, yeah, that was me. It wasn't her.
Yes. So for the parents who are watching, for the educators who are watching, and they are still unsure about having these conversations, there's so much. Before I go there, there's so much more I want to say, and I know we can't have it in one conversation, so we have to do this again, because I can't really close without talking about the this is a new word that I learned. You know how we learn about parentification in our practice and stuff like that? I learned about adultification and how Black girls especially starting around the age of 5. I saw this on the red table. Starting around the age of 5, they are more adultified, as in being seen in a more sexual way than their white counterparts. And we tapped on it a little bit when we talked about how the body of our Black girls are developed so much at a so much younger age. And so I think I want you to say something to the parents about how sometimes our narrative can come off as blaming our young girls for how they're developing.
I think it's very important for us to kind of let them know that it's normal. First of all, the way the body is developing is normal, and that they don't have to be shameful of that. Because I know most kids don't want their parents in the room. They don't want you to see them naked, and like that's cool. Or some people are in the household are always naked, and the kids become desensitized to it. So we definitely have to be careful what we're saying and the way in which we're saying. But I kind of see it just how I see being a therapist. If we listen, I think the same way our clients will tell us what they need and what they're there for, I think maybe we need to do more listening to our kids, more conversations, but not just negating their voice, not just dismissing what they're feeling. We go and we buy all these clothes, or you expect all these labels and all these brand names for our kids. What tone are we actually setting for the expectation of our kids? A lot of these brand clothes that we're purchasing are more adultish. So you got a 5-year-old in Gucci, that ain't gonna be the same as the Children's Place outfit, right? That I used to buy my kids. It's not gonna be cut the same way. The style's not gonna be the same. And so kind of navigating it with the child's voice in mind. A lot of times we are forcing our kids to wear certain clothes, have their hair a certain way, giving them certain jewelry. And so a lot of it we're oppressing upon them. And then when they go to quote unquote getting fast or embracing that part of themselves, then we want to have something to say about it. But you weren't saying that. I'm just saying we kind of contribute to that as well while our kids are growing up.
That is so true. And I say we don't kind of, I say we contributed to it. and then we turn around and we call them fast and grown, and then put body shaming on top of that.
Absolutely.
And they have to come see us for depression and all that other stuff.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it starts young. It starts early. The conversation of sex and sexuality starts way before they're thinking about intercourse or all those other kinds of stuff. And I think the more we become comfortable with having those conversations, I think the healthier our children, our families, our nation will be.
Absolutely. Well, my motto, our physical health and our mental health and our sexual health is just as important as our physical health. And so I think those conversations need to start early. I think all the guilt and shame around reaching out for help, we definitely got to do better, because as a people, I think we're suffering. And so I think in changing the narrative, we're changing so many things that could come as a result of that. And so I want to challenge those who are watching to really think about maybe what that narrative has been with their parents, right? And what that narrative may be or has been with their kids. And is there something that I've been doing that may be unhealthy, that could be potentially harmful to my child? And how can I change that based on what's out there? The research, the books, the programs,
Now, Sabra is the money maker. She's like, do a webinar, a paid webinar, ladies.
Yes.
We're talking about clinicians who have a hard time having this conversation, or even parents who have a hard time having this conversation, and giving them a safe space so that they can learn how to have this conversation, practice having these conversations.
Absolutely.
Because we're talking about R. Kelly and stuff like that, but I believe that if we have more of these conversations across the whole spectrum, we can shut down people like R. Kelly.
Absolutely. And I don't mind doing a webinar. I know I've been doing these trainings off and on now for probably about 3 years. I do know colleagues of mine who actually have products and everything, and I could definitely shout a couple of them out. I know Dr. Lex James actually has a children's book that kind of explores all of these things, and it is available on Amazon. So you guys go cop that and support Dr. Lex James. She's a sex educator in, I want to say, Missouri, but I might have got that wrong. I know one of my colleagues, Dr. Donna Oreo, I always mess up her last name. She has done a platform where she has a whole program on how to talk to kids about sex. And so I want to focus more on the clinicians and those who are professionals on how to create a sex positive environment. I'm not really big on recreating the wheel. If there's already quality products and services out there for that, I'm all for supporting my colleagues, but definitely do some work with us as clinicians as to how can we create a more sex positive environment, and how that can benefit the work that we do, for sure. But we'll see. You don't never know, Saber. We might come up with a specialized course for mothers and daughters, on how to navigate this thing.
That's right. How to navigate these conversations, these spaces.
Yes.
And Cassandra says, are either of you familiar with soul ties?
Oh, yes. I personal experience with soul ties.
I am very familiar with soul ties, and
that was the last time I was in therapy.
and we laugh about it, but it's such a serious,
absolutely,
it's such a serious thing that binds you. In sex usually opens the door for that, and it binds you in such a way, just like Chasity said, that's the last time she was in there. It's not.
I'm just saying.
It's real, and I think we got to do another conversation because a lot of times without proper information, and you get in these relationships, you're forming some ties that it's hard to break.
How about you talk about that on my podcast, Naked Truth? How about
all right.
How about we do that?
Cassandra, I'm gonna go on Chastity's. She said, can you discuss it briefly? Okay, Chas. Briefly, and then we're gonna give you the link to her podcast because we will discuss it in full extent on her podcast. But say a little something about soul ties.
Well, I mean, first of all, someone who believes in soul ties probably believes in the religion of Christianity, because my understanding of it and my belief of it is it's associated with an actual belief system that kind of correlates with the Christian belief. And so the belief is that everybody, it's kind of like, remember in sex ed, when the teacher used to put all the stuff on the board and they put all the X's and they say, if you slept with this person, then you slept with all the people that they slept with, and you end up with this big board of X's. And so basically soul ties, what my understanding of it is that every person that we sleep with, we actually have a connection with. And a lot of times evil or bad things are being passed through the actual sexual the sexual channel. And so I know for me, when I say that was the last time I was in therapy, I just couldn't realize why I couldn't leave this particular person alone. It doesn't matter what I did. I was tied to them. I was connected to them. I could not break free of that relationship, no matter how damaging or unhealthy it was. And so for me at that time, it was brought to me as more of a spiritual battle that I was going through. Mm-hmm. And so, I went through some channels and some things that I had to do to break that tie, and part of that was removing every article that this person had bought from me. So rings and jackets, etc., getting rid of all of that. At that time, for me, it was prayer. It was worship. As far as music, it was not listening to secular music. It was a lot of those types of things at that time in my life. And so for everybody, it could be different. That's just my personal experience with soul ties. It's the only explanation as to why I could not get rid of this dude, why I was constantly driven and drawn to him, and also why other areas of my life, were being impacted by that.
Right. And so, even when it's not good for you, that connection. So while we say we are sexual beings, it's also important that we recognize that we are also spiritual beings.
And I
And
think that's an important one right there, Ian. And that's a whole nother that's a whole nother segment. But also making sure we don't clump our kids into one spiritual belief too. I know some might not agree with that, but I think allowing our kids to develop who they are as a spiritual being is really important as well. A lot of times we're passing down what our parents and grandparents passed down to us. I know now we live in a day and an age where there are different belief systems and people are learning to be more spiritual and a source of like energy and things of that nature as opposed to an actual religious belief. But I think that that's really important because sometimes we push our kids into harm's way. But that's all I say about
yeah. And Kelvin said that needs to be your next book, the Soul Tie. And Audra says, hey, Audra,
Hey,
welcome. I just say, hey, Chastity, hey,
hey.
and I think while we have these conversations, if we're gonna have the physical, we're gonna have the spiritual, we're gonna have the emotional, we need to have the sexual, the financial, because if we're gonna be holistic, let's be holistic all the way.
You already know my belief on that. I have yet to see somebody post something about being holistic and sexually be included in. I haven't seen that.
And that's all about changing the narrative of sex and sexuality, and not make it such a distant thing, that's the afterthought, because
Yeah,
it's so much about who we are. We are spiritual, we're sexual, we're emotional, and yeah.
and some of the best conversations I've had around this have been in religious institutions, so in churches. And kudos to the pastors and our members who are allowing these conversations to happen, because I think we definitely need to take a look at that.
Exactly.
So,
Chaz, I've taken up so much of your time. I thank you so much
oh,
for
awesome.
coming and having this conversation. And I hope that whoever is listening, if you're a clinician, you find some resources for your clients. If you are a parent, you find some resources for your relationship with your, not just your daughters but also your sons. And if you're just here for the fun of it, that you will find resources to help us change the narrative around this, so that again we're not taken by the R. Kelly's in our lives and things like that. So we have to really change the narrative. And Sabra is saying, Chastity, what is Lexi's last name? Is that Lexi
Dr. Lex James.
James, right?
Yes, Dr.
Okay.
Lex James.
And when we're done, if you could drop her, tag her in this. I'm not sure if
Absolutely.
we're friends or
I'll
not.
tag her. I'll also drop the link for the book as well.
Okay. And Chastity, tell people where they can find you.
Oh, okay. So you can find me on Instagram, and Twitter at Chas for Change. You can find me on Facebook. I have a fan page. It's Chasity Chandler, LMHC, MCAP, CST. You can find me on LinkedIn, Chasity Chandler. You'll soon be able to hear my podcast. I have now been recording and I'm about to uh, hopefully release the first episode within the next 2 weeks, and that will be everywhere you see podcasts now, so iTunes and all of that stuff. So you can look out for that. Naked Truth. Feel free to join our Facebook group as well. What else? I'm author of 2 books and 2 anthologies, and so Black Therapists Rock: The Glimpse Through the Eyes of Experts, which can be found on my website, and I will make sure I add the new book on there as well. Brand New Me Journey, and my thank you. My chapter in that book is a quest to feel wanted. And I got a couple of other projects coming out soon, which we're gonna do a sexual health and wellness telesummit soon. So look out for that if you guys want to hear more information from experts in the realm of sex, sexuality, and gender, and a couple of other things that will be announced at the end of that telesummit. So yeah, stay tuned. Big things popping.
Excellent, excellent. You are doing it. You're doing big things. And if you just want help with your own sexuality, sexual functioning, all of that,
Absolutely.
look her up. Chastity is
Absolutely.
the expert and my go-to person around this topic. So I thank you again for your time. Thank you for joining us. We have so many people still on the line, y'all. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the
Absolutely.
like and share this out. And if you're catching us on the replay, I promise you, it is stay till the end. It is really, really good. Share it out. Share it out. Let's get this all over the place so that we can start changing the narrative. Okay.
Absolutely.
This has been a great conversation with you. Again, I am Ann Dillard, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this has been a pleasure talking with sex expert and sex therapist Chasity Chandler. And just thank you. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night. God bless you all.